The sun was low over the jagged cliffs of Yalara, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold. The wind cut across the rocky desert like a sharp blade, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and distant salt flats. Lyra crouched behind a jagged rock, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her robes, once elegant and adorned with the insignia of her noble house, were torn and covered in blood and dust. She could barely remember how she had ended up here, alone, abandoned by the only people who were supposed to protect her. It had started hours, or maybe days ago. Time felt different when life and death were so close. She had refused the marriage arranged by the Council of Elders, a union meant to secure her family's power. She had tried to speak with reason, to explain that she could not give her life to someone she did not love, but the Council had only seen defiance. Their eyes had been cold and their judgment harsher than the desert sun. When they finally pronounced her fate, she realized too late that no one would stand by her. Guards had struck her down and left her bleeding, a cruel lesson to anyone who dared defy tradition. Her world had narrowed to survival. Every step hurt. Her arms and legs ached from bruises and deep scratches. She had no water, no food, and barely enough strength to crawl. Yet even in her despair, Lyra refused to surrender. She could not. Giving up meant certain death, swallowed by the cliffs and sand, or worse, by the predators that prowled the night. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a sound that made her ears twitch. A low mechanical hum, almost imperceptible, but different from the desert's usual whispers. Lyra froze, straining to listen. She had been taught to sense danger, to read the world in tiny signs, and this was different. It was deliberate, calculated, like a heartbeat of a living creature. She pressed herself flat against the rock, hoping the source would pass. But it did not. A shadow moved across the canyon floor. Unlike the agile predators she had learned to avoid, this shadow moved steadily, confidently, without fear. Lyra's heart pounded. She wanted to hide deeper, but her body betrayed her, heavy with exhaustion. The figure emerged into view. At first she thought it was one of the Elders' soldiers returning to finish what they had started. But then she saw the shape, the human shape, taller than any alien she had ever seen, dressed in a strange uniform of dark green fabric and armor plates that gleamed even in the dim light. The figure moved with caution but also with care, scanning the terrain with sharp, alert eyes. The human knelt suddenly, scanning the ground near Lyra. She froze, unsure whether to trust her instincts or run again, but she could barely move. Her body refused her commands. She was too weak, and the thought of being left behind again terrified her more than facing an unknown stranger. The human, sensing movement, glanced in her direction. "Hey," he said softly, his voice carrying across the dry canyon, calm and steady. "I see you." "Don't move too fast," Lyra's heart skipped. Something in his voice was different from the harshness she had known all her life. It carried a strange kind of warmth, a human kindness she had never heard from anyone in the council. She blinked, barely lifting her head, and met his gaze. For the first time since she had been cast out, she felt a flicker of hope. The human approached slowly, keeping low to avoid startling her. "You're hurt," he said, kneeling beside her. "I can help, but you have to trust me." Trust was not easy for Lyra. Betrayal had been her companion for too long, yet she could feel the difference in him. There was no malice in his eyes, only focus and concern. She gave a small nod, the closest thing to agreement she could manage. The human, Jason, as she later learned, examined her injuries carefully. He cleaned the wounds using some small tools from his pack and wrapped her arms and legs as best he could. His hands were strong but gentle, steadying her when she winced from the pain. "You're stronger than you look," he said with a hint of a smile. "But we need to get you somewhere safe before nightfall." The desert night was unforgiving. Temperatures dropped sharply, and predators that hunted in darkness would smell fear and weakness easily. Lyra tried to move, but her legs trembled. Jason lifted her carefully, carrying her in a way that seemed almost effortless. She felt the warmth of his presence, the rhythm of his breathing, and it calmed the storm of fear inside her. They moved slowly, navigating through narrow canyons and over crumbling cliffs. The terrain was treacherous, and Lyra could feel the heat of exhaustion and pain in every step. But Jason never faltered, scanning ahead, listening to every sound, anticipating danger. At one point, a massive desert creature emerged, its eyes glinting in the moonlight, jaws snapping. Jason reacted instantly, pulling Lyra behind a boulder and using a device that emitted a high-pitched pulse. The creature recoiled and disappeared into the darkness, leaving them shaken but alive. Hours passed. Lyra began to feel something she had not experienced in a long time: safety. Not comfort, not luxury, but the simple assurance that she would live through the night. She began to speak, her voice weak but steady, telling him fragments of her story. Jason listened without judgment, asking questions when necessary, but mostly letting her speak. There was a patience in him, a human quality she had never seen among her own people, who judged first and listened later. By dawn, they reached a plateau where the wind was softer, and the sun's rays were just beginning to pierce the horizon. Lyra could see the expanse of the desert stretching endlessly, a sea of red and gold sand. For a moment she felt small, insignificant, yet the human beside her made her feel protected, empowered even. Jason set up a small shelter using equipment from his pack and gathered whatever edible plants he could find nearby. Lyra ate slowly, tasting the food she had not had for days. Her strength returned gradually, and with it a spark of determination. She realized that she did not want to return to her old life where defiance meant death. Not anymore. As the sun rose fully, warming her face, Lyra watched Jason work, noticing how he moved with precision and care. She began to understand that humans, though fragile compared to the massive creatures of her world, had an adaptability and resourcefulness that made them powerful in a different way. She had lived her life believing her people were supreme in strength and intelligence. But here was proof that survival and courage came in many forms. By the time the day was in full swing, they had made camp in a small canyon protected from predators and wind. Lyra lay on a mat Jason had prepared, her body finally able to rest. Jason sat nearby, checking the perimeter with a quiet vigilance. She could see the determination in his eyes, and she realized he would not abandon her no matter what. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond fear and betrayal, a life where she could make choices, explore the world, and perhaps even trust another being completely. She did not yet know what the future held, but one thing was certain: she would not face it alone. The human soldier had other plans for her survival, and for the first time Lyra felt that maybe, just maybe, those plans could include her own freedom. As the sun set behind the distant cliffs, casting long shadows across the desert, Lyra closed her eyes. The journey ahead would be dangerous, full of unknown threats and challenges, but she was no longer alone, and that made all the difference. With Jason by her side, she had a chance not just to survive, but to fight for a life she could call her own. And in the quiet of the desert night, among the shadows and the whispering winds, a fragile trust began to grow, a bond between human and alien that neither tradition nor cruelty could break. The sun rose over the jagged cliffs of Yalara, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Lyra stirred, her body still sore but stronger than it had been the day before. The wounds Jason had treated were healing, and for the first time, she felt a sense of hope she had not known in weeks. She sat up slowly, wincing as her muscles protested, and looked at the human soldier who had saved her life. Jason was already awake, checking the perimeter with careful eyes. "You're moving better," he said without turning, his voice calm but alert. "We need to keep going. It won't be safe here long." Lyra nodded. She trusted him now completely. The memory of betrayal from her people still lingered, but Jason's presence reminded her that not all beings were cruel. Some, like him, were willing to fight for life itself, even when the odds were against them. They packed their modest camp and began the trek toward the distant human base Jason had mentioned. The desert was harsh, but with Jason leading, they avoided the dangerous cliffs and unstable terrain. Lyra marveled at his ability to read the land, his eyes scanning for threats invisible to her. She followed closely, leaning on him when the path became too difficult. As they moved, Jason explained more about humans and their principles of survival and teamwork. Lyra listened, fascinated by a species so different from her own, yet so capable of courage and compassion. She realized that strength was not only measured by brute power or strict tradition, but also by the ability to think, adapt, and protect those who could not defend themselves. Hours passed and the sun climbed high. They rested in a shallow canyon, shaded from the heat. Jason shared his water ration, and Lyra drank greedily, feeling life return with every sip. They ate a small meal of rations and desert plants, Lyra's alien biology was different, yet she found the human food surprisingly nourishing. "Do you think they'll come after me?" she asked quietly, looking out toward the horizon. "They might," Jason replied. "But if they do, we'll be ready. Humans are resourceful, and you're stronger than they expect." The journey continued through the afternoon. As the sun began to lower, strange shadows appeared on the ridges ahead. Lyra tensed, her alien instincts alerting her to the approaching danger. Jason crouched low, signaling her to stay behind him. Soon, figures appeared, tall, imposing, armed with sleek weapons that gleamed even in the dim light. They were soldiers from the Alien Council, sent to retrieve her by any means necessary. Lyra's heart raced, but Jason's calm presence steadied her. "Stay close," he whispered.
"Watch and learn."
"I won't let them harm you." The alien forces moved with precision, expecting fear to paralyze their target, but they underestimated Lyra and Jason. Together, they used the canyon terrain to their advantage. Jason set small mechanical traps he carried in his pack, while Lyra observed the soldiers' patterns and called out their movements. With careful coordination, they forced the alien squad into narrow passes where their numbers counted for less than strategy and cunning. A tense standoff followed. One of the alien commanders, the man betrothed to Lyra, stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "You cannot escape your duty, Lyra. You belong to us," he shouted. Lyra met his gaze steadily, her fear replaced by determination. "I belong to myself," she said firmly. The words felt liberating, a declaration of her independence. She had learned to survive the desert, and now she would survive the chains of tradition as well. Jason moved swiftly, using the narrow canyon walls to block attacks and push the alien soldiers into disadvantageous positions. Lyra, drawing on her alien agility and instincts, created diversions and helped disarm their opponents without unnecessary violence. They moved as a unit, human and alien, blending intuition and strategy. The battle was tense, every second a test of skill, wit, and courage. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the alien soldiers were retreating. They had underestimated the partnership between human adaptability and alien instinct. Lyra stood tall, breathing heavily, her heart pounding not from fear but from exhilaration. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "You did well," he said. "You were amazing out there." For the first time, Lyra felt pride not only in surviving but in fighting back. Her life had not been stolen, and she had reclaimed it with her own strength and the unexpected alliance of a human soldier. She looked at Jason, understanding that his presence had changed everything. Without him, she might have survived the desert, but she would never have faced her pursuers and lived to see freedom. The night was quiet, and they made camp in a hidden ravine. Jason prepared a fire and Lyra sat close, warming herself. She realized that trust had grown into something deeper than mere survival. They did not need words to understand each other. Every glance and action had built a connection stronger than any spoken vow. "Tomorrow we reach the human base," Jason said softly. "There you'll be safe. You can rest, recover, and decide your next steps. No one will force you into anything." Lyra nodded, feeling a rare sense of relief. For the first time, she could imagine a future not dictated by fear or political ambition. She could choose her own path. Perhaps one day she would return to her people, not to obey, but to teach them the strength found in freedom, courage, and trust. Sleep came slowly that night, but it was deep and restorative. Lyra dreamed of the desert cliffs, not as a place of danger, but as a landscape she had conquered. She saw herself standing on the cliffs, not as a victim, but as a survivor, her spirit unbroken, and beside her always was Jason, the human soldier who had chosen to fight for her life when no one else would. The following morning, they continued toward the human base. The journey was long, yet each step was lighter than before. Lyra had regained much of her strength, and she practiced her new skills with Jason, learning how to navigate, track, and defend herself. The bond between them deepened, built on respect, shared danger, and mutual admiration. As the human settlement appeared on the horizon, a cluster of domed buildings and vehicles glinting under the morning sun, Lyra felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The base represented safety, technology, and a world entirely different from her own. She had never imagined that humans could be so organized, so advanced, and so willing to help a stranger. Jason guided her inside the base, where medics examined her further. Advanced treatments healed her more quickly than anything her people could offer, and she marveled at the tools and devices humans use to preserve life. She realized that survival was not just about strength or instinct, but also about ingenuity and compassion, qualities humans possessed in abundance. News of her presence spread quickly among the humans. They were fascinated by her story, by the courage it took to defy tradition, and by the alliance she had formed with a human soldier. Lyra, who had once felt powerless, now found herself respected and valued, not for her lineage but for her actions and character. Days passed and she began to recover fully. Jason taught her about human society, their principles and their ways of thinking. She learned that humans were adaptable, inventive, and driven not by rigid rules but by curiosity, empathy, and courage. Lyra realized that freedom was not only about escaping danger, but also about embracing new ideas and possibilities. Meanwhile, the Council of Elders remained furious. Their attempts to send agents after her were blocked by the humans' technology and strategy. Lyra knew her old life would never be the same, and she did not want it to be. The chains of tradition had been broken, and she had discovered a new way to live, one guided by choice, strength, and alliance. Finally, the day came when Lyra could leave the base with confidence, knowing she was safe and capable. She and Jason stood together at the edge of the settlement, looking toward the horizon where the desert met the sky. The world ahead was unknown, but it was hers to explore, free from fear and oppression. Lyra turned to Jason, her voice steady and certain. "Thank you. For everything." Jason nodded, a small smile on his face. "No one should be left to die when there's a chance to help. You survived, Lyra, that's what matters." For the first time, she truly believed it. She had survived the desert, survived betrayal, and survived the expectations of her people. But more than that, she had discovered something she had never known. That humanity, flawed, unpredictable, and yet remarkably brave, could be a force for life, hope, and freedom. And as they walked together toward the future, Lyra understood that she had found more than safety. She had found a companion, a mentor, and an ally in Jason, the human soldier who had other plans that allowed her to choose her own destiny. The desert wind whispered around them, but this time it carried not danger, but possibility. And in the light of the rising sun, Lyra finally smiled, ready to face a world where she could be truly free.